Hi everybody, I'm Ryan, and over the course of the past few weeks, we've looked at 5-color Enigmatic Incarnation. We've looked at card choices in the deck, the overall strategy of the deck, how to play the deck, how to sideboard with the deck against the top 10 most popular decks in Pioneer, different builds and flex slots in the deck, and nuances and play patterns that you need to know about when you play the deck. And so I'm going to combine all of those into one big deep dive video. Here you go. So this is 5-color Enigmatic Incarnation. And the first thing you need to understand about this deck is that there are two major combos happening. The first combo is the namesake of the deck, Enigmatic Incarnation, which is a 4-mana enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice another enchantment. If you do, search your library for a creature card with mana value equal to 1 plus the sacrificed enchantment's mana value, put that onto the battlefield, then shuffle. So you can combo this with basically any enchantment in the deck. So for example, if you sacrifice a Nowhere to Run or an Up the Beanstalk, you can grab Kutziel's Flanker, Skyclave Apparition, or Zur. If you sacrifice an Overlord of the Hauntwood, you can grab a Linvala or an Overlord of the Boreal Bilges. If you sacrifice a Leyline Binding or Overlord of the Boreal Bilges, you can grab a Overlord of the Mistmoors or an Atraxa. And this is extremely powerful, especially if the enchantments are just sitting on the battlefield, having already done their thing and not really doing anything else. It allows us to totally toolbox our deck, which is very cool. The other combo in our deck is centered around Zur Eternal Schemer. Zur Eternal Schemer is a 3-mana 1/4 with flying. Enchantment creatures you control have Death Touch, Lifelink, and Hexproof. And you can pay 2 mana, 1 white, 1 generic, to have target non-aura enchantment you control become a creature in addition to its other types, and has base power and toughness equal to its mana value. So this is already good in a deck with a lot of enchantments, right? You can man up an Enigmatic for a 4/4, man up one of these for a 2/2, man up a Leyline Binding for a 6/6, but it's especially good alongside the Overlords for 2 reasons. The first reason, and maybe the obvious reason, is they are enchantment creatures in and of themselves. And so if you just have an Overlord and are attacking with an Overlord, it has Death Touch, Lifelink, and Hexproof, which is excellent. The less obvious reason, and the very, very cool reason, is if you impend any of these Overlords, they are not creatures, but they are enchantments. They have done their thing. So you can pay the 2 mana on Zur to make an impended Overlord an enchantment. So let's say you do it to Overlord of the Hauntwoods. Say you impend Overlord, get your 4th land, untap, play your 5th land, play Zur, man up Overlord of the Hauntwoods. It is now a 5/5, even though the creature is a 6/5. Because it was manned up with Zur, it is now a 5/5 with Death Touch, Lifelink, and Hexproof. And it says nothing about while it's impended that it doesn't have the other text on the card. So when it attacks, it still triggers the text on the card. That is same true with drawing cards off of Flood Pits and getting 2 insects with Mistmoors, even if it is still impended, which is absolutely absurd. Speaking of the Overlords, to talk about each of these cards as, individually, Overlord of the Flood Pits, you can impend for 3 or play for 5 as a 5/3 with flying. And when it enters, again, even if you impend it or attacks, draw 2 cards and discard a card. Very good for filtering out bad cards, because unfortunately we have to play a lot of bad cards because we're a combo deck. Overlord of the Hauntwoods is a 5-mana 6/5 with impending 4. And when it enters or attacks, create a tapped colorless land token named Everywhere, that is every basic land type. And Overlord of the Mistmoors is a 7-mana 6/6 with impending 4. When Overlord of the Mistmoors enters or attacks, create 2/2/1 white insect creature tokens with flying. All these cards very good in and of themselves, even better with Zur, and even extra better with Enigmatic Incarnation. So let's talk about all the other cards in the deck that have less to do with the combo and why we're playing these cards. Playing 4 Fatal Push, we're playing black anyway because of Zur, and this deck is a little susceptible to aggressive decks, even if Zur gives lifelink, so it's important to play the Fatal Push to stop those aggressive strategies. Same thing with Nowhere to Run. The cool part about Nowhere to Run as well, though, is yes, it has that additional, creatures your opponent control, don't have hexproof and ward, basically, but it also kills a creature, and also it isn't really doing anything on just sitting on the battlefield, so it's really easy to sacrifice to Enigmatic Incarnation to grab one of these 3-drops. Play for Up the Beanstalk. Obviously, the cool combo thing that's happening with Up the Beanstalk is, it draws a card when it enters, but also if you impend any of the Overlords or cast Leyline Binding for 1 mana, even though it says 5 mana, you will still draw a card off of Up the Beanstalk, even if you're only paying 3 mana for Overlord of the Huntwood. So a really good start is like turn 2 Up the Beanstalk, turn 3 Impend Overlord, draw a card, get an extra land, go. And we're playing 4 Vanishing Verse. Vanishing Verse is excellent in the mirror match and is just very good in Pioneer at the moment, and just like a pretty unconditional removal spell. As far as our 3-drops go, they are mostly targets for our 2-drops. So as far as our toolbox cards, we have Kutziel's Flanker, 3 mana, 3/1. That does a little bit of everything. It's good graveyard hate we're able to play in the main deck because we can search it up. You know, it's decent against aggro. He's gained 2 life, scry 2, and the last one's fine against board wipes. I don't think I've ever used the first mode on Kutziel's Flanker, to be totally honest with you. Skyclave Apparition is decent removal. Being able to exile a permanent 4 or less, and then when it leaves the battlefield, they get a X Spool Illusion creature token where X the mana value of the exiled card. And they're playing 4 Zur, which we also very often search up by sacrificing these enchantments, but we've already talked about the Zur and why we're playing it in the combos. I talked about Enigmatic Incarnation as well as the Overlords. We're playing 4 Leyline Binding. Leyline Binding, we're playing 5 colors anyway. We're a 4-color deck, but everywhere off of Overlord of the Huntwoods is every basic land type, so it can make, give us the red mana for Leyline Binding. So often costs 2, sometimes costs 1, and it's just an O-ring effect with flash. It's very, very good. Also triggers off the Beanstalk and everything. We're playing a Linvala the Preserver. Linvala the Preserver is a target for sacrificing one of these 5 mana Overlords. 6 mana, 5/5 with flying. When Linvala the Preserver enters, if an opponent has more life than you gain 5 life. When it enters, if an opponent controls more creatures than you get a 3/3 white green angel creature token. So it's a way to catch up, because remember, we're a little susceptible and a little slow compared to aggro decks. And Overlord of the Boreal Villages is a 6 mana, 5/5 with impending 4. When it enters or attacks, it deals 4 damage to any target. It's really hard for us to cast this besides off of Cavern of Souls and off of Overlord of the Huntwoods, which is why we're only paying 1 to grab off of an Enigmatic Incarnation. I've already talked about Overlord of the Mistmoors. So Atraxa is pretty much a game ender. Sacrificing an Overlord of the Boreal Villages or a Leyline Binding is a 7 mana 7/7 with Flying, Vigilance, Death Touch, Lifelink, and when it enters, reveal the top 10 cards of your library. For each card type, you may put a card of that type from among the revealed cards into your hand and put the rest on the bottom of your library random order. Very often this draws like 4 cards, sometimes 5 cards. It is absolutely disgusting and very often ends the game because it also is a threat in and of itself and is very, very, very good at blocking. As far as the sideboard goes, the first thing I wanted to mention that I think is a little obvious at this point that I'm surprised I didn't mention before is this is a Yorion deck, which means we play 20 more cards in the main deck. And the reason it's a Yorion deck is because it combos insanely well with an enchantment deck. For example, we can bounce Nowhere the Run to give an extra -3/-3 and extra removal, but also is especially good alongside the Overlords, because if we have an impended Overlord and we bounce it with Yorion, it comes back as not impended, still triggers the Overlord trigger, but it comes back just as the creature, which is really game ending very, very, very often. We're playing 4 Thoughtseize for combo decks and decks that are good at neutering what we do, control decks, whatever. Playing 2 Rest in Peace, decent enchantment, but also graveyard hate. 1 Archon of Emeria to be able to throw into the 3-drop slot to tutor out for these combo decks and whatnot. 4 Knockout Blow, because like I said, it is a very, very tough matchup, is the red aggressive deck is. We're playing 1 Elishnorn, Mother of Machines, very good against the mirror match, but also very good in our deck because a lot of these things have enter the battlefield abilities. I can trigger twice. 1 Thought Distortion, again, for really anything that plays a lot of instant sorceries that the game goes long. And 1 Rurik Thar the Unbowed, very good against these decks that play a lot of non-creature spells that we can tutor out in the 6-drop slot. So this is the sideboard for 5-color Enigmatic Incarnation. We're playing 2 Rest in Peace or Graveyard Hate, Arcana Myria for combo decks and things that are trying to cast multiple spells in the same turn, 4 Knockout Blow for the aggro decks, 1 Elishnorn, mostly for the mirror, but really anything that has a lot of end of the battlefield abilities, 4 Thoughtseize for these combo decks and control decks, same thing with Thought Distortion, a Yorion because Yorion deck, so that just kind of stays on our sideboard, and then 1 Rurik Thar for these decks that play a lot of non-creature spells. We're going to talk about how to sideboard against the top 10 most popular decks in the format. And the most popular deck in Pioneer is Rakdos Midrange. And we're starting off very exciting with Rakdos Midrange by running it back. Rakdos Midrange is a great matchup for us. There are no cards on the sideboard we care about. The main deck is already insane against this deck. No sideboard. The second most popular deck is Rakdos Prowess. Against this deck, we definitely do sideboard. We're bringing in the 4 Knockout Blow. And I'm a fan of Archon of Emeria because, it stops Slickshot show-off plotting. very often and kind of stops the claim to fame plus pump spells combo. I'm not a fan of Overlord of the Flood Pits in this matchup. So we're not looking at drawing cards, we're looking at interacting as much as possible, and that's a big reason why I'm just shaving one up the beanstalk, and that's how I sideboard against Rakdos aggro. The third most popular deck is Izzet Phoenix. Against Izzet Phoenix, we're bringing in Rest in Peace, we're bringing in Archon of Emeria. I'm a big fan of Ruach Thar. We're bringing in Thoughtseize. And we're bringing in Thought Distortion. And we're going to be taking out Nowhere to Run because sometimes it can kill Ledger Shredder. A lot of decks aren't playing Ledger Shredder. It can kill Picklock Prankster, which is not a great interaction, and we don't really care to be killing Arc-like Phoenix like that, so we're cutting Nowhere to Run. For a similar reason, we're going to be cutting Overlord of the Boiler Villages. And I'm also a fan of cutting Fatal Push because, again, most people are off Ledger Shredder and on Artist Talent. And even if the Ledger Shredder thing happens, like we have Vanishing Verse, we have Skyclave, we have Leyline Binding, we have other ways to answer it. So just really focusing on what we're trying to do and interacting in other ways, I think is important. So that's how I sideboard against Izzet Phoenix. The fourth most popular deck is Jund Sacrifice. Against Jund Sac, we're bringing in Rest in Peace, make sure that they can't combo us. Also a fan of Thoughtseize, just to deal with like the combo side of the deck and take the big payoffs away. I'm also a fan of Elesh Norn because it stops the combo. The combo is very scary and it helps our game plan as well. We're going to be cutting Fatal Push mostly because really only cleanly deals with Blood Tithe Harvester, and it's really hard for us to activate Revolt outside of Enigmatic Incarnation. And so it doesn't really deal with Mayhem Devil and literally can't target Ygra. So we're cutting that. Cutting Linvala, because it doesn't really do anything against this deck. And then we're going to shave on Nowhere to Run. It deals with Mayhem Devil, it does not deal with Ygra. So really we're only Nowhere to Running Blood Tithe Harvester and Mayhem Devil. And there's other answers to it in this deck, so this is how I sideboard against Jund combo. The fifth most popular deck is Nib Delight. Against Nib Delight, we're bringing in Archon of Emeria because they can't do the Bring Delight things with that. Bringing in Elesh Norn because the deck is very similar to ours, and Elesh Norn kind of neuters the whole deck. Thoughtseize is also excellent against this deck, being able to take those big payoffs that we're super, super afraid of. We're going to be cutting Fatal Push because it does nothing against Nib Delight, and then shaving on Nowhere to Run for a similar reason, though Nowhere to Run does a little bit more. And that's how I sideboard against Nib Delight. The sixth most popular deck is Hidden Strings Lotus Field combo. Against this deck, we're bringing in Rest in Peace because it can stop the Leer combo attempts. Archon of Emeria because it's great. That stops them from comboing at all. The 4 Thoughtseizes because you can take important cards. Oh my god, I can't grab it. There we go. And 1 Thought Distortion for similar reasons. And then the Ruach Thar because they have to deal with Ruach Thar before they do their thing. We're going to be bringing out removal for Fatal Push, the 4 Nowhere to Run. And we're going to take out the Linvala because it didn't really do anything against the deck. So this high sideboard against Hidden Strings combo. The 7th most popular deck is Selesnya Company. Against Selesnya Company, I'm a big fan of Thoughtseize, being able to take out those important Hate Bears and also Collected Company, and Elesh Norn neuters a lot of the deck. Similarly to the other aggro creature decks, I don't like Overlord of the Flood Pits, and then we're going to shave on Kutziel's Flanker, just because like I don't really care about gaining life against this deck. It's just important we stabilize, at least not as much as against the Rakdos decks. So that's how I sideboard against Selesnya Company. The 8th most popular deck is Gruul Aggro. Against the Gruul Aggro deck, we are bringing in Knockout Blow, and that is it as far as stuff to bring in. And like against the other creature aggressive decks, we're just bringing out our Flood Pits. And that's how I sideboard against Gruul Aggro. The 9th most popular deck is the Azorius Flash deck, which is a version of Azorius Spirits, but capitalizing on Enduring Curiosity and whatnot. Against this deck, I like Elesh Norn because it can turn off Rattle Chains, it can turn off Skyclave, it can turn off Spellqueller, you know, all that stuff. And we're just going to shave a Kutziel's Flanker and then run it back. There's no real hate we have. And then the 10th most popular deck is the Mirror Match. In the Mirror Match, we are bringing in Elesh Norn. Just totally neuters them. It's great. We're bringing in Thoughtseizes. Bringing out Fatal Push. Again, doesn't really do anything. Really hard to trigger Revolt, and really it only kills these cards, which zero matters, but meh. And then for a similar reason, we are shaving Nowhere to Run. And that's how I sideboard in the mirror. These are the non-flex slots in 5-color Enigmatic Incarnation. you'll notice that the deck is, for the most part, figured out. Everybody is playing at least these 79 cards in the main deck in Enigmatic Incarnation, and these 6 cards in the sideboard, which means there's only 1 flex slot in the main deck and 9 flex slots in the sideboard. So what can you play in those slots? You can play these cards in those slots. In that one slot, generally, you have 5 options. Now let's talk about why you would pick each one of these options. By the way, if you wanted to check out the overall strategy of the deck and things like that, then make sure you check out the deck tech or sideboard guide or whatever. That's not what this video is. First off, Glasspool Mimic. Glasspool Mimic is pretty cool in the sense that it's another land, so you have less of a chance of missing your land drops, but also as another card that you can Enigmatic Incarnation away either in Up the Beanstalk or Nowhere to Run to grab a clone effect. And clone effects are pretty strong because nearly every card in our deck has an enter the battlefield ability, and it allows us to trigger those enter the battlefield abilities again because a lot of our deck is one-ofs. Knight of Autumn, I am actually really high on. Knight of Autumn is sort of a catch-all card, which is pretty cool in a toolbox deck. It's a 3-mana 2/1. When it enters, you either put 2+1/+1 counters of Knight of Autumn, destroy target artifact or enchantment, or gain 4 life. Artifact or enchantment hate in the main deck is great. Being able to gain 4 life and have a blocker is great against aggressive decks, and then it can also just have a big power for a 3-mana creature. Noxious Gearhulk is solid removal for potting away one of our 5-mana enchantments. It's a 5/4 with menace. When it enters, you may destroy another target creature. If creature destroyed this way, you gain life equal to its toughness. So you're able to gain life. It's a blocker and a threat in and of itself. You'd want this if you feel like you needed more removal, especially against these mid-range and aggressive decks. Vein Ripper is an option as a 6-mana target. Is a 6/5 flyer with ward sacrifice creature, which means it's kind of tough to deal with. And whenever a creature dies, target won't lose 2 life and you gain 2 life. It's generally just a solid threat, and that's really difficult to deal with. 4th Overlord of the Mistmores is another option as a 7-mana spell. Having Impending 4 for 4 mana, it's a 6/6. Whenever Overlord of the Mistmores enters or attacks, create 2/2/1 white insect creature tokens with flying. This is probably the lowest variance choice, a choice that you can make and just make the overall primary strategy of your deck stronger because you just be adding a 4th Overlord. These would be if you feel like you wanted to target these. So you're going to select one of these 5 cards and add it to the 79 cards that are non-negotiable, non-flex slots. Now, maybe a harder decision is building the sideboard. So you're going to be selecting 9 of these 18 cards to continue and build out your sideboard. So you would play Portable Hole if you're worried about aggressive decks, or permanents that mana value 2 or less that are particularly good. I'm thinking like Witch's Oven or something. High Noon is really solid against Slickstock Show-Off decks, but also very good against Lotus Field. The 3rd Rest in Peace just has additional graveyard hate. 4 Knockout Blow for these red aggressive decks, which is honestly kind of a bad matchup for us. Leyline of Sanctity is really solid against Thoughtseize decks or the burn decks that are starting to pop up. Hellish Norn, great in the mirror match, and really any deck that has a lot of enter the battlefield effects. Also very good for us as well. It doesn't just neuter the opponent's deck. Thoughtseize, number 3 and number 4 for control, combo, mirror match, things like that. Glistening Deluge would mostly be for Selesnya Company. Very strong. Just 3-mana board wipe against a deck that honestly is pretty good against us. Thought Distortion for control and combo as well. And Rurik Thar the Unbound, a 6-mana 6/6 Vigilance Reach. When it attacks each combat if able, and whenever a player casts a non-creature spell, it deals 6 damage to that player. This is something we can Enigmatic Incarnation out that is really solid against things like Phoenix and control and combo. So you're going to be selecting 9 of these cards to join the 6 non-flex slot cards that are in the main deck. These cards. And once you have selected the 1 out of 5 cards to join the non-flex slot cards in the main deck and selected 9 of the 18 options to join these 6 cards in the sideboard, you have built your own personal but stock build of 5-color Enigmatic Incarnation. First off, impending triggers still trigger Up the Beanstalk. I think it's really important to understand that. Even though a cost is reducing, you're paying an alternate cost. All it cares about is the cost in the top right. So whether you're playing Leyline Binding for 1 or paying 3 mana for a Overlord of the Hauntwoods, you will still draw a card off of an Up the Beanstalk on the battlefield. Second, and this kind of goes without saying and really just comes with playing the deck a lot, Be aware of the enchantments you need to have on the battlefield, especially the turn you play an Enigmatic Incarnation, to grab the cards in your deck and to toolbox your deck properly. So especially when you have an Enigmatic Incarnation hand or you have a chance to draw it, you might have to change what enchantments you play earlier in the game so that you can grab the cards from your deck that are good in certain situations. And it's just something that's really important to keep in mind. One really good example of that, and another nuance, is if you leyline binding a token early, then when you sacrifice Leyline Binding to Enigmatic Incarnation, then your opponent doesn't get anything back, but you get an Atraxa or an Overlord of the Mistmoors. Both absolutely unbelievably good. And if you're just picking up the deck, you might be wondering why you're playing Zur Eternal Schemer. Now, while manning up a Leyline Binding is really cool, or blocking with a Death Touch Nowhere to Run or whatever, when you turn an impended Overlord into a creature, the way that it works is technically it's still impended. Its power and toughness are going to be the mana cost, like it said on Zur. But none of the text on that enchantment, now creature, has been removed just by it being impended. So when you attack with one of these Overlords, it'll still trigger the thing on the Overlord. So for example, if you impend an Overlord of the Mistmoors, you get two 2/1s. You play a Zur, activate an Overlord of the Mistmoors. It is now a 7/7 because that's its mana cost, and you attack with it, and it creates 2 more 2/1s. It is unbelievable. Also, as kind of another side note with that, when the impending counter falls off and there's no more impending counters on it, and technically this card isn't impending anymore, the Zur power and toughness overrides the power and toughness that is on the card. This one is kind of obvious, but is still important to mention. Remember that Yorion lets enter the battlefield triggers resolve again. Things like Nowhere to Run, you can turn a Yorion into a removal spell. But also, a big reason why we're playing it is it resets impending. By resets, I mean it just removes impending. So if I have 2 impended Overlords that are not creatures, and I play Yorion and bounce them, not only do I get the enter the battlefield triggers again, but they enter as their creature form, which can cause giant swings. And then the last thing that's important to mention is what to name with Cavern of Souls. So 90% of the time, you're going to be just naming Avatar so that your important creatures, basically, which are your avatars, can enter the battlefield. Also, it's important that you can cast Overlord of the Boiler Bilges if you draw it, because you can't really always rely on Overlord of the Hauntwood. Sometimes, depending on your hand, and you'll learn this just by playing a bunch, sometimes you will need to name Human or Wizard so that you can cast Zur. But also remember, when you side in Rurik Thar, that's red as well, and we don't have any red lands besides the Overlord of the Hauntwood land or Cavern of Souls, so you might need to name Warrior. And you want to name Warrior because we have other warriors in our deck, and you might as well make them uncounterable, and we don't have any other ogres in our deck. And having something like a Rurik Thar, especially if we're siding it in, having it stuck in our hand is a nightmare, even though our plan is to fetch it out. If you like this video, please be sure to like and subscribe. Check me out on social medias. Links are above me and in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.